Hey everybody, Leif with Substrate Climbing Performance here, and I wanted to shoot this video today to talk to you about the difference between yielding and overcoming isometrics, in particular when we talk about training our fingers and our finger flexors. Now, these are two terms that we hear an awful lot in the climbing training space, and I think there's a little bit of confusion as to what separates one from the other and when we should be training these. I'm going to be using the Pitch 6 force board and force plate today to show you a couple of techniques that you can implement the next time you want to try this in your climbing training. But first, let's talk about isometrics. What are they? When we talk about muscle contractions, there are three types: concentric, eccentric, and isometric. So if I'm curling this kettlebell up, that is a concentric muscle contraction in my bicep. The bicep is working and it's shortening while doing that. When I lower the kettlebell, that is an eccentric muscle contraction. The muscle's still working, but it's lengthening while doing that. But if I hold the kettlebell in a static position, that is an isometric contraction. The muscle is still working, but there's no change in length, okay? But what's the difference between yielding versus an overcoming? A great way to think about these is that a yielding isometric is resisting a force for a longer period of time. This in climbing is when we are holding onto the wall, holding onto holds, and we're moving our body, we're moving our feet. These are yielding isometrics, okay? We use this all day, every day when we're climbing. When we train these, we want to train the duration for about 10 seconds, rest, then 10 more seconds. And you're going to repeat this until you see a decline in force production of about 10 to 15%. Then it's time to be done. Yielding isometrics are great because we use them all the time when we're climbing. The problem with training them is that they require a lot more force generation. You can generate so much more force with a yielding isometric, which unfortunately means they require more recovery time, but they're still very beneficial and we need to be using these. Now, an overcoming isometric is where you are literally trying to overpower or overcome that force. Now, this is what we use when we grab holds for that first instant when we are climbing on the wall. So again, very, very important to train. Now, when we train overcoming isometrics, we only want to train them for about 3 to 5 seconds. And it looks very, very different. You can't generate as much force with overcoming isometrics, but it focuses all of the force generation onto your fingers and finger flexors. So again, very, very beneficial. So let me show you a couple of different techniques and methods here. I have my force board and force plate already set up. And quick pro tip, as I've been working with this a lot more lately, I really like to put the anchor point when I'm doing something like a deadlift or isometric training back between my heels instead of in front of the board and closer to my toes. The reason being, when I'm trying to generate max force, it drives the force directly into my heels and my skeleton, and the board has less of a tendency to want to flip up versus if the anchor point were in front. So if you haven't tried that, check that out. I've got my flashboard set up here, and I've got the edges at about mid-thigh height. That's going to be great for both of these exercises. So the first, I'm going to demonstrate a yielding isometric. So for a yielding isometric, again, I'm going to be trying to resist this force, this immovable force, for a duration of about 10 seconds, okay? I'm going to have a slight bend in my knees. I'm going to have a slight bend in my arms. I'm going to try and maintain that half crimp position. And I'm going to be pushing with my legs, pulling with my upper body as hard as I can for about 10 seconds, okay? So that's going to look like this. I'm going to repeat this for as long as I can until I see about a 10 to 15% decrease in my force generation, and then I'm going to be done. 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off, that's plenty. Again, these are fantastic because it helps us generate as much force as possible, but I'm using my whole body to generate the force. Now, for an overcoming isometric, it's going to look similar, but quite a bit different. For an overcoming isometric, I'm going to lock my knees out, I'm going to lock my elbows and my shoulders out. And a great way to think about implementing these is I'm going to try and curl the edge up just using my finger flexors. But this time I'm only going to be generating the force for about 3 to 5 seconds. So it looks like this. Again, this focuses all of the force generation on the fingers and the finger flexors, which is also fantastic. We need to be training both of these, but you're not going to be able to generate as much force because obviously you're not using as much of your musculature. So that's the difference between yielding and overcoming isometrics. We need both in climbing training. I would say for most protocols, alternating back and forth between the two, depending on the finger training day, is fine. Again, there's a lot of different protocols out there that you can use with yielding and overcoming isometrics. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I love talking to you all about this stuff. Tune in later for more tips and tricks. Thanks to Pitch 6. We'll see you soon.